I never considered myself special. All my life I lived in a small village, where every day seemed like the previous one. Cows mooed in the pasture, tractors lazily dug furrows, and the sun generously scattered rays on golden fields. My house stood on the outskirts, almost at the forest, which began behind our street. The forest always seemed to me a mysterious place, dark, quiet, as if hiding its secrets in thick foliage. The only thing that disturbed the usual order was an old tree on the edge of our plot. It was a huge willow with long branches hanging down to the ground, as if it covered its own secret room. No one knew how old it was. Grandma said that this tree stood here even before the first houses appeared in the village. They said that something was once buried under the willow, a treasure, an ancient treasure, or, as one neighbor claimed, someone's sins. I always thought of it as silly village inventions. The tree had its own charm, but I didn't find anything strange or mystical about it. It was just a beautiful and mysterious place to hide from the scorching sun or noisy neighbors' children. Until one summer evening. The day was unbearably hot. I was sitting on the porch and lazily leafing through an old book I had found in the attic. It was a thick notebook in a leather binding, with a worn cover and yellowed pages. On the title page was written in neat handwriting, Diary of Fyodor Kalinin, 1935. Neither the name nor the year meant anything to me, but I loved such finds. They were like a window into the past, through which you could spy on other people's lives. Leafing through the pages, I found notes about the weather, the harvest, family, ordinary everyday notes. But on one of the pages I came across lines that made me tense up. She came again tonight. A shadow under the tree. I saw her moving under the willow branches. A voice, quiet as the whisper of the wind, calling me. But I did not go. I know that once I go there, there will be no turning back. My heart sank slightly. Could this really be about our Willow? But what kind of shadow was this? I turned the page, but the diary entry ended there. On the next page, instead of the usual notes, there were only diagrams and strange symbols that I could not make out. The sun was setting, painting the village in warm orange tones. The heat began to subside, and a light breeze brought the smell of mown grass. I decided to go to the Willow. I did not have a special goal. I just wanted to check. Maybe I missed something, spending my childhood here. Maybe there was something interesting hidden in the tree's branches or under its roots. I pushed aside the long branches and went inside. It was always cool and quiet here. The ground was soft and slightly damp. I began to examine the trunk and roots, but everything seemed ordinary until my gaze fell on a strange protrusion in the ground, barely visible in the twilight. It was a rectangular piece of wood that looked like the lid of a chest. My heart pounded with anticipation. I began to carefully rake the earth with my hands. The lid gave way, but not immediately. Under it was hidden something like a box, deep in the ground. Inside lay a bundle wrapped in dark, oiled cloth. I did not immediately dare to untie it, but curiosity overcame fear. When I untied the knot, an old silver medallion and a small envelope fell out of the cloth. The words faded on it. Do not open until you know the truth. I sat in the semi-darkness under the tree, holding this strange bundle in my hands. My thoughts were confused. What is this truth? And why do I feel so scared just thinking about this envelope? It was as if something unfamiliar had awakened inside me, a feeling that had previously haunted me. It was a mixture of fear, interest, and some strange premonition. I returned home, trying to throw it all out of my head, but I couldn't. The envelope lay on the table, as if waiting. I tossed and turned for a long time at night, until I finally fell asleep. And then I had a dream. I was standing under an old willow, but it no longer seemed safe to me. Its branches were moving, as if they were reaching out to me. A figure emerged from the shadows, barely distinguishable in the semi-darkness. I couldn't make out her face, but I felt the cold coming from her. Suddenly she raised her hand and pointed to the ground at her feet. There was a hole there, deep and dark. And then I heard a voice, low, full of reproach. They knew everything, but they didn't stop. Now it's your turn. I woke up in a cold sweat. It was 4 a.m, and it was still night outside. But at that moment I knew. This was only the beginning. After that dream, I couldn't calm down. Day after day, the medallion and the envelope seemed to attract me. It seemed that they were living their own life, slowly but surely growing into my thoughts, displacing everything else. I looked at the medallion for a long time, but it remained a mystery. Strange symbols were engraved on its surface, similar to ancient runes, and inside there was a tiny mirror. It looked almost new, although the medallion itself was noticeably worn. I didn't know what to think, but every time I looked at my reflection, it seemed to me that it was changing slightly. Nonsense, of course, but the feeling did not go away. A few days later, I returned to the Willow again. I was drawn there, as if an invisible force was pulling me back. I thought I could find something else that would explain the origin of the medallion or its connection to the diary. Armed with a shovel, I decided to dig up the area under the tree, starting from the place where I found the chest. The earth turned out to be heavy and dense, as if over the years the roots had absorbed everything around them, not wanting to let go of their secrets. I dug for a long time until I hit something hard. My heart sank. I thought I had stumbled upon the chest again, but it turned out to be a stone slab, barely visible through a thick layer of dirt. The same symbols as on the medallion were visible on its surface, only they were much larger. I carefully cleaned the slab, trying not to damage it, and suddenly felt the ground beneath my feet tremble slightly. I recoiled in surprise, but nothing else happened. However, this did not stop me. After a short attempt, I realized that the slab was removable. I lifted the heavy stone lid with a shovel and was hit in the face by the smell of dampness and earth. Under the slab was a narrow tunnel leading down to the roots of a tree. Dark, narrow, it looked as if no human hand had touched it for many decades. I didn't dare go down there right away. It was reckless, and I knew it. But curiosity buzzed in my head like an annoying fly. "Now it's your turn." The words from the dream came back to me. I didn't know what it meant, but I felt that the answer was somewhere nearby. Armed with a flashlight and a rope, I finally decided to go. There were no stairs or steps, so I had to carefully descend, clinging to the roots. The tunnel turned out to be surprisingly deep, but the air there was fresh, as if it had been thoroughly ventilated. Small pebbles and roots crunched under my feet. A few minutes later, I reached the bottom. There was thick darkness all around, broken only by the weak beam of the flashlight. The tunnel led deeper, becoming wider. I took a few steps and a small room, hollowed out in the ground, opened up before me. The same runes as the medallion were visible on its walls, but now they were bright, as if illuminated from within. The sight was both fascinating and frightening. In the center of the room stood a strange object, resembling a small stone altar. On its surface lay a book, and next to it a metal cube with an intricate pattern. Just looking at these things made me shudder. Inside the cube, something was ticking faintly, like an old clock. The book turned out to be a diary, similar to the one I found in the attic, only much older. On its first page was the inscription, "Diary of Elena Kalinina, 1872. I was stunned that the surname matched the author of another diary. Obviously, it was a family, but what connected them to this strange place? I began to carefully turn the pages. The handwriting was neat, but the text was almost faded, and it was difficult to read. I saw her coming out from under the tree. Her eyes were two bottomless darknesses, whispering. She was calling to me, but I knew I shouldn't give in. Grandmother said that this is not our reality, but a reflection of what we are afraid to see. But what if she was right? What if the tree really is a repository of our darkest secrets? The entries were full of riddles. The more I read, the less I understood. It seemed that the author was trying to fight something intangible, an entity that lived under the willow. At some point, I came across a page that detailed the story of the cube. The cube is the key. It locks her, preventing her from penetrating beyond the tree. But if someone breaks it or opens it, all barriers will collapse. The consequences will be irreversible. I tore myself away from reading and looked at the cube. Now it seemed to me that the ticking had intensified, as if it were getting louder. My skin was covered in goosebumps. Throwing the book down, I grabbed the cube and tried to examine the mechanism. There were small notches on its surface, reminiscent of a puzzle. My curiosity overcame my caution. I began to twist the parts of the cube, aligning the notches. At some point, it clicked into place and there was a faint click. Something inside began to creak, and then there was silence. That's when I heard a sound. At first, it was barely audible, reminiscent of a light breeze. But it grew louder, getting closer. I turned off the flashlight, hoping to remain unnoticed, but something was already moving in the depths of the tunnel. The rustling in the tunnel turned out to be just the sound of crumbling earth, but even this simple noise made my heart clench for a moment. The feeling of anxiety did not leave. The cube, the medallion, and the Kalinins' diaries were drawing me deeper and deeper into a mystery, the meaning of which remained unclear. What were these finds hiding? Why did generation after generation seem to guard this place and its secrets so carefully? I went upstairs with a feeling of relief, which quickly gave way to determination. The cube and the book now seemed to be parts of a single mechanism, connected to the tree, the tunnel, and perhaps the very place where our village was located. These thoughts were spinning in my head all the way home. The next morning, I decided to turn to the archives. The district library was located in an old building with high windows and creaky wooden floors. Inside, there was a semi-darkness and the smell of dust mixed with the aroma of old paper. Among the archive shelves, one could find not only books, but also rare documents that had preserved the imprints of time. First, I began by studying the cube and its symbols more carefully, using old reference books on symbolism and ancient Slavic culture. On one of the pages of the book found in the library, I noticed a drawing that very much resembled the ornament on the surface of the cube. The symbols were part of ancient signs used to protect territories or valuable objects. Such a cube could be created as a kind of lock or cipher to hide something important. This discovery prompted me to take the next step. I returned to the Kalinins' diaries. In the pages of Fyodor's diary, I found a mention of a mechanism that requires knowledge of the sequence of actions. The description flashed words about a key that must be used with caution to avoid unpredictable consequences. After much thought, I decided to return to the cube itself. Its surface was covered with notches and moving parts, like a complex puzzle. I managed to turn several segments until one of the sides gave way, opening a hidden compartment. Inside was a folded sheet of paper. It was a hand-drawn map. It depicted the area around the village, and in the forest, not far from the edge of the map, there was a small cross. I went into the forest that same day, barely waiting for the right time. The map led me to a small hill hidden among thick trees. At the top of the hill, an abandoned hut was visible, hidden by overgrown bushes and old branches. Its walls were covered with moss, and the roof had collapsed in places. Nevertheless, the hut seemed solid and reliable. The door was locked with a massive metal lock, on which I noticed familiar symbols. My guess that the cube could be a key was confirmed. After a few minutes of working with it, the lock opened. The door creaked, letting me inside. It was dark inside. The only ray of light came through a crack in the roof, illuminating a table on which neatly folded papers and a ceramic lamp lay. Everything around looked as if the hut was not abandoned, but simply deserted for a long time. On the table among the papers, I found another diary, typed on an old typewriter. The first page read, Archive of Kalinin Research, 1924. Among the materials were many diagrams, notes, and reports related to geology and the study of the earth. Rare minerals, soil properties, and strange finds in the area of the village were mentioned. One entry in particular caught my attention. It said that something unusual had been discovered under the roots of a willow tree. Initially, it was thought to be a natural anomaly, but it later turned out to be man-made. Researchers assumed that it was part of an ancient device or an artifact left over from an unknown culture. These words explained a lot. The Kalinin family, generation after generation, had been conducting their research related to this place. Their findings, as it turned out, were not mystical, but rather scientific, possibly historically important. They were trying to understand the nature of the find and its meaning, and the cube was part of this whole chain. When I returned home, my backpack was full of documents, and my head was full of guesses. The materials I had found had opened up new horizons for me. But at the same time, there were so many questions. What exactly was under the tree? Why was it so important that an entire family had dedicated their lives to studying this secret? With each step, This story unfolded, leaving more and more details, but the answers were still ahead. Several days passed before I decided to return to the Willow. Thoughts about the diaries, cube, and map I had found continued to spin restlessly in my head. Questions haunted me. Why was this place so important for the Kalinins? What consequences could there be if I revealed all the secrets of this tree? I understood that something else was hidden underground, but what exactly remained unclear. The cube was now not just an object of my curiosity, but a key that could open not only a physical lock, but also a solution that generations had been searching for. On the surface of the stone slab that was in the tunnel, I noticed several additional symbols that I had not previously noticed. They were so subtle that they could easily have been missed if I had not seen the map with the cross. It was like an indication confirming that the correct understanding of each detail and sequence was the key to solving the entire riddle. I came to the Willow again, with determination in my heart. With each step, it seemed to me that something was about to open. I already knew what had to be done, but the feeling of tension did not leave. Approaching the tree, I saw how its branches, as before, bent to the ground, creating a shadow in which the entrance to the tunnel was hidden. But now this place did not cause me fear, but on the contrary, a desire to find definitive answers. I dug up the area under the tree again and carefully lifted the stone slab. The tunnel, which I already knew, greeted me in its gloomy silence. Descending into it was not scary, but rather, as if I was returning to something long left. All those notes and observations that I found only strengthened the feeling that I was on the threshold of something significant. Making my way along the narrow passage, I approached the very place where I first saw the stone slab. Now I knew for sure that something more was hidden under it. Familiar symbols appeared on the walls again, only now there were many more of them. They began to form something whole. I examined them carefully, and then, when I almost despaired of finding some logical explanation, one of the images, which I had not noticed before, lined up into a clear figure. It was a plan, another fragment of what I saw on the map. There was no shadow of mysticism or mysterious phenomena here. Everything I discovered was connected with precise measurements, geographical features, and developed schemes. This secret had nothing to do with ancient cultures, and no ancient entities guarded this place. Everything was connected with completely different research, the search for rare minerals, the study of the soil and its properties. Returning to the cube was a logical step. I reconnected its parts, feeling how they fit together perfectly. The click appeared again, but now it was not just the opening of a lock. It was like the completion of a long process. The cube opened the last mechanism. I saw how a thin crack appeared under the roots of the tree, from which a small metal box emerged. I opened the box and found several objects in it. A sheet of paper, several ancient coins, and a small metal device resembling a compass. On the sheet was a new entry, written in a hand similar to the handwriting I had seen in the Kalinins' diaries. This was the last, perhaps most important clue. These studies did not begin with a treasure hunt, but with an attempt to understand the earth, its depths, its history. We studied the roots of the willow not only as a symbol, but also as a natural anomaly. It does not grow here by chance. Understanding its place in the ecosystem and what it holds within itself can change everything. I realized that they were not trying to find something supernatural. This was an entire scientific program that included research into geology, ecology, and even physics. The Kalinin family was looking for ways to change the perception of the Earth, its depths, and perhaps even challenge traditional theories about the origin of this area. The ancient symbols, the cube, and the medallion were just tools in their search, tools that helped keep this research secret from outsiders. The metal device, reminiscent of a compass, turned out to be a simple geographical instrument used for precise measurements. It was part of a more complex equipment that would allow for a more accurate analysis of the composition of the soil and the hidden layers of the earth. That day, I buried everything back, leaving the medallion, the cube, and the objects I had found in the same place. They were part of the story I had lived through, but now their role was clear. The ancient symbols no longer seemed mystical to me. They were part of the research that had begun many years ago, when this entire land was just an empty hill for the enthusiasm of exploration. I left the willow alone, knowing that it held no wonders or ancient secrets, All that it had to offer was hidden in the earth, and in the works of people who had dedicated their lives to studying the world around them. The story of the Kalinin family, it turned out, was not about finding treasure, but about the desire to understand the place they called home. From that moment on, I no longer felt the strange attraction to the willow, but the feeling of a satisfied completion did not leave me. The answers had been found, and this chapter was closed.